The world thought it had seen everything. Cutting-edge military tech, invincible tanks, drones that can strike from miles away. But then, out of nowhere, a small inventor from Zimbabwe sent shockwaves through the U.S. defense world. Maxwell Chikumbutso, a man many had never heard of, revealed something the military didn't see coming: a self-powered tank. Imagine a war machine that doesn't need fuel, that doesn't rely on fragile supply lines, and can operate indefinitely. That's exactly what Chikumbutso claims to have achieved. And when the Pentagon got a glimpse, the room went silent. Engineers who had spent decades in defense innovation couldn't believe their eyes. This isn't science fiction. This is raw, uncompromising innovation. Chikumbutso's tank reportedly generates its own energy through a revolutionary system he's been perfecting for years. No batteries. No external power source. Just pure, self-sustaining motion. Visualize a battlefield where every other tank is crawling along, waiting for refueling trucks, while this tank keeps moving, unstoppable, silent, and invisible to the logistical nightmares that have always defined modern warfare. And it's not just about endurance. The U.S. defense analysts realized that if this technology scales, it could fundamentally redefine armored warfare. Imagine armies that no longer need supply chains, that can operate in the most remote regions without a hint of vulnerability. But here's the kicker. The military didn't expect it from Africa. They expected breakthroughs from Silicon Valley, European defense labs, or top-secret Pentagon programs. Not a solitary genius in Harare, working quietly, testing and refining while the world slept. Then came the demonstration. A full-scale prototype moving across rough terrain, climbing inclines, maneuvering through obstacles, powered entirely by the device Chikumbutso invented. Analysts watched in disbelief. Every calculation they had made about fuel, energy, and mobility suddenly seemed obsolete. This revelation triggered a chain reaction. Defense contractors started reassessing decades of assumptions. Could Chikumbutso's technology be reverse-engineered? Could it survive combat conditions? Could it be adapted for other vehicles, ships, or even aircraft? And while the world debates, Chikumbutso continues his work quietly, almost invisibly. No flashy PR campaigns, no press conferences, just innovation at the edge of what we thought was possible. The U.S. defense world, with all its budgets, research, and top scientists, now faces a question that keeps them up at night. If one man in Zimbabwe can redefine energy and mobility for a tank, what else is possible? And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Sources close to the project suggest that what powers the tank could eventually revolutionize energy systems far beyond military applications. Entire cities, vehicles, and remote regions could gain access to virtually unlimited, self-sustaining power. The implications are staggering. If true, Chikumbutso isn't just challenging defense conventions, he's challenging the very foundation of energy, engineering, and global power dynamics. And yet, despite all this, he remains largely unknown outside a few specialized circles. The world hasn't caught up yet, because the story doesn't end with the tank. In fact, what the U.S. defense analysts feared most wasn't a single vehicle, but what Chikumbutso could build next. And if history is any guide, it won't be just one tank, it will be a series of innovations that will force the world to rethink everything about energy, mobility, and military power. The whispers inside the Pentagon grew louder. Meetings that once revolved around conventional tank designs now included one question at the top of every agenda: how do we respond to Chikumbutso? Top military strategists and energy experts scrambled to analyze footage, schematics, and reports of the self-powered tank. Some admitted quietly that they had no idea how it functioned. Meanwhile, in Zimbabwe, Chikumbutso's team quietly expanded their tests. Engineers and technicians moved in sync with his vision, experimenting with scale, durability, and mobility. The tank wasn't just a proof of concept anymore, it was evolving into a prototype that could challenge decades of military doctrine. Intelligence agencies started tracking the development. Satellite images, drone surveillance, and intercepted communications showed activity at Chikumbutso's testing grounds, but the full extent of his technology remained shrouded in secrecy. Each attempt to understand it only raised more questions. Then came the international attention. Defense journals, tech analysts, and online forums erupted with speculation. Could this tank operate in extreme conditions, deserts, jungles, even Arctic environments, without ever needing refueling? Early reports suggested yes. And if it could, the strategic implications were beyond imagination. Some skeptics tried to dismiss it as a hoax. But every attempt to replicate the system in controlled labs failed. Every conventional engineer admitted the same thing. This technology didn't follow the rules they knew. And it wasn't just about survival on the battlefield. Chikumbutso hinted at civilian applications, agriculture vehicles that never stopped, emergency transport in disaster zones, even energy grids that could run independently of power stations. The potential was monumental, and the world barely realized it. Meanwhile, whispers of covert meetings circulated. Defense contractors reportedly reached out with veiled offers. Governments sent envoys under the guise of research collaboration. And yet, Chikumbutso remained elusive, choosing instead to focus on perfecting the technology rather than courting fame or fortune. Then came the simulation tests. Analysts in the U.S. war rooms ran thousands of scenarios. In every simulation, the self-powered tank altered outcomes dramatically. Entire operations that once relied on predictable fuel lines now faced an unpredictable variable, a tank that could operate indefinitely, strike silently, and retreat without logistical constraints. And here's the chilling thought that kept analysts awake at night. If one man could develop a single self-powered tank, what about a fleet? What about armored divisions that no longer rely on conventional energy sources? The balance of military power could shift overnight. Back in the lab, Chikumbutso observed, calculated, and improved. Every test feed, every terrain challenge, every obstacle was another step closer to perfection. And while the world debated feasibility, he quietly demonstrated that the impossible wasn't just possible, it was already happening. The U.S. defense community, once confident in decades of technological superiority, now faced a humbling reality. They had underestimated not just a man, but a vision that could redefine war, energy, and global strategy. And yet, as groundbreaking as the tank is, insiders hint that this is only the beginning. The technology that powers it could soon extend far beyond armored vehicles, potentially disrupting entire energy markets, reshaping global logistics, and giving rise to innovations no one has even imagined. Because Maxwell Chikumbutso isn't just building machines. He's building a future where energy scarcity is obsolete, where mobility is unrestricted, and where a single visionary can alter the course of nations. Across the globe, defense analysts began quietly reassessing decades of military doctrine. Countries that once relied on conventional armored divisions now faced a dilemma: ignore the breakthrough and risk falling behind, or scramble to understand a technology they couldn't yet replicate. Conferences and war games were suddenly dominated by one question: how do you counter a tank that never stops? Meanwhile, rumors of covert negotiations surfaced. Some governments reportedly offered Chikumbutso access to vast funding and advanced labs, but every overture was politely declined. He wasn't motivated by wealth or recognition. His goal was innovation on his terms, a vision unshackled by bureaucracy, ego, or politics. Inside the lab, the tank's evolution accelerated. Each iteration grew more advanced, quieter, faster, and more resilient. Simulations showed it could withstand conditions that would immobilize conventional tanks: floods, sandstorms, extreme temperatures. And the more the world tried to analyze it, the more it became clear that Chikumbutso was operating in a domain beyond standard physics assumptions. Then came the whispers of a demonstration for select international observers. A secluded site, cameras limited to a handful of experts, and a tank moving seamlessly over terrain previously considered impossible for any armored vehicle. Footage leaked online in fragments, sparking a mix of skepticism, awe, and panic. Analysts called it the tank that rewrites the rules. Speculation turned into strategy. Militaries began exploring ways to integrate the principles behind the self-powered technology into their own systems. Scientists debated whether it could scale to aircraft, naval vessels, or even drones. Every time someone thought they understood it, Chikumbutso introduced a subtle modification that rendered conventional assumptions useless. Meanwhile, the geopolitical implications became unavoidable. Nations started assessing their energy vulnerabilities, realizing that if Chikumbutso's system could be adapted for civilian or military infrastructure, it could eliminate dependence on fuel imports, redefine supply chains, and create a seismic shift in global power dynamics. Yet Chikumbutso remained a ghost. Interviews were rare and public appearances non-existent. Instead, his work spoke for itself, a silent revolution unfolding one prototype at a time. Every breakthrough sent ripples through defense circles, forcing a reevaluation of what was possible and what was inevitable. In the corridors of the Pentagon, debates raged. Strategists argued over whether to attempt collaboration, containment, or replication. But for now, the full extent of the technology remained beyond reach, controlled entirely by a man whose ambition was not conquest, but invention. And as the world scrambled to catch up, Chikumbutso's vision expanded. He hinted at possibilities beyond warfare, self-sustaining vehicles for disaster zones, autonomous transport for remote communities, energy grids that could function independently of fossil fuels. The self-powered tank was only the beginning, the opening act of a larger story the world was just beginning to witness. The question on everyone's mind was no longer, is it real, but what comes next? And if history had taught anything, it was that one visionary, working quietly and relentlessly, can change the trajectory of nations, industries, and the very concept of what's possible. As word of the self-powered tank spread through intelligence circles, a subtle but intense race began. Countries quietly increased surveillance, analyzing every hint of activity from Chikumbutso's lab. Engineers and strategists debated the feasibility of reverse engineering the technology, but every attempt failed, and each failure only reinforced the aura of genius surrounding him. Meanwhile, whispers of clandestine visits to Zimbabwe emerged. Foreign envoys, posing as energy consultants or tech investors, were seen near the testing grounds, but Chikumbutso remained unshaken. He welcomed collaboration only on his terms, refusing to compromise the integrity of his invention or its principles. In secret war rooms, military analysts began running simulations that once seemed absurd. Entire battle strategies were reimagined. Fleets of conventional tanks, dependent on fuel convoys, now faced the possibility of being outmaneuvered by a single self-powered unit that could operate indefinitely, traverse impossible terrain, and strike without warning. The balance of power seemed poised on a knife's edge. Even outside military circles, the potential applications sent shockwaves. Energy corporations and tech giants began evaluating the feasibility of adapting the system for civilian transport, grid independence, and disaster response. Governments imagined cities no longer constrained by energy shortages, vehicles no longer tethered to charging stations, and logistics networks freed from fossil fuels. Chikumbutso, however, remained focused on perfecting his machines. While the world speculated on its implications, he quietly tested enhancements, adaptive mobility systems, energy output optimization, and stealth capabilities. Every iteration blurred the line between science fiction and reality, making the self-powered tank just the opening salvo in a series of innovations yet to be revealed. Rumors began circulating about the next project. Some insiders hinted at autonomous drones powered by the same energy principle, capable of operating in swarms without resupply. Others spoke of vehicles designed for extreme humanitarian missions, reaching disaster zones, carrying supplies, and providing energy in regions where infrastructure had collapsed. Meanwhile, the U.S. and allied military strategists faced an uncomfortable truth. One man had outpaced entire defense industries. Every effort to understand or replicate his system only confirmed what they feared. This was not just a tactical breakthrough, it was a paradigm shift. And yet, Chikumbutso's approach remained subtle. There were no dramatic announcements, no grand unveilings, just the quiet, relentless expansion of his vision. Each success, each demonstration, was like a whisper that the future was being rewritten and the world had barely caught on. The stakes were no longer confined to borders or budgets. The very rules of energy, mobility, and power were in flux. Analysts began predicting that if this technology scaled, it could redefine geopolitics, reshape global economies, and force humanity to rethink what was possible for vehicles, energy, and even warfare itself. Chikumbutso's genius lay not just in invention, but in timing. He moved quietly, deliberately, letting others scramble to understand what they could not yet see. The world's brightest minds, armed with decades of research and millions in funding, were chasing shadows, while he built the future in real time. And as whispers of his next creation began to circulate, one unspoken truth grew clearer with each passing day. The self-powered tank was only the beginning. The world had not yet witnessed the full scope of what Maxwell Chikumbutso was capable of, and when it did, the rules of power, energy, and mobility would never be the same again. As whispers of Chikumbutso's next invention circulated, international defense agencies went into overdrive. Every major power quietly assessed vulnerabilities, mobilizing research teams to predict what could come next. There was fear, yes, but also awe. One man had shifted the strategic landscape without firing a single shot. Meanwhile, Chikumbutso's lab remained a fortress of innovation. Engineers, scientists, and technicians moved with precision, implementing improvements that seemed almost impossible. Reports hinted at enhancements that could make vehicles entirely autonomous, capable of navigating uncharted terrain, and powered indefinitely without any external energy source. In the corridors of power, discussions turned urgent. Governments debated alliances, intelligence sharing, and ways to gain access, or at least insight, into the technology. Some even quietly considered unconventional measures, partnerships with private firms, covert acquisition efforts, or recruitment of talent from Chikumbutso's network. But every option was complicated by one unshakable truth. The man behind the innovation controlled the narrative, the technology, and the pace. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of fragmented footage showing vehicles moving through terrain previously thought impassable. Analysts scrambled to verify authenticity. Some dismissed it as fabrication. Others quietly admitted that if real, this technology would eclipse any conventional military advancement of the past half-century. Beyond the battlefield, the implications were staggering. Self-powered vehicles meant unprecedented autonomy for humanitarian missions, disaster relief, and energy delivery in the most remote corners of the globe. Entire regions, long hampered by unreliable infrastructure, could suddenly leapfrog decades of dependency on conventional fuel and energy grids. Chikumbutso, however, refused to accelerate for fame or political gain. Each prototype, each test, each enhancement was calculated, measured, and precise. While the world speculated, he quietly proved that a vision, executed with relentless discipline, could challenge assumptions about physics, engineering, and strategy. Insiders began hinting at a broader plan. The tank was just the first demonstration, a symbol of what self-sustaining energy systems could achieve. What came next might redefine transportation, logistics, and even the very concept of mobility itself. Observers speculated about swarms of autonomous vehicles, floating energy units, or even aircraft that could operate indefinitely without refueling. And the world's reaction was paradoxical, fascination mixed with anxiety. Military planners, energy strategists, and industrial giants all realized the same unsettling truth. One visionary had the power to outpace entire institutions. The race to adapt, replicate, or contain the technology had only just begun, and the playing field was being redrawn with each passing day. Yet, Chikumbutso remained enigmatic. Public appearances were rare. Interviews were scarce. Instead, he let the technology speak, letting every successful demonstration create ripples that quietly reshaped global thinking about energy, mobility, and strategic advantage. One unspoken question hung over every analyst, every government, every military office. If the self-powered tank is just the beginning, what will Maxwell Chikumbutso reveal next? And the answer, no one yet knew, but everyone suspected it would challenge everything they thought they understood about power, technology, and the future. And then, just as the world scrambled to catch up, Chikumbutso unveiled a glimpse of his ultimate vision, a fleet of self-powered vehicles, each operating independently, each capable of sustaining energy and mobility without limits. Analysts could only watch, knowing that decades of conventional thinking had just been upended. The self-powered tank was no longer just a machine. It had become a symbol of what one person, with vision and relentless determination, could achieve. A reminder that innovation doesn't always come from boardrooms, billion-dollar budgets, or global superpowers. It can come from a single mind willing to challenge the impossible. As governments, militaries, and industries raced to understand and adapt, the world stood on the brink of a new era. One where energy scarcity, logistical constraints, and technological limits might no longer exist. And at the center of it all, quietly, Maxwell Chikumbutso continued to work, inventing the future on his own terms. Because history is never written by the cautious. It's written by the visionaries, by the ones willing to defy expectations, to push boundaries, and to show the world that the impossible is only the beginning. And in that quiet, unassuming lab in Zimbabwe, the next breakthrough was already in motion. The world didn't see it coming, but soon it would have no choice but to follow.